All right, thank you everybody so much for being here. I'm delighted and honored to introduce our guest speaker tonight, Marlon Peterson, as well as Professor Matthew Ichihashi Potts. Before I say a little bit more about each of them, I want to note that this event is part of the Mahindra Humanities Center's Abolition series, which examines how the humanities, history, language, storytelling, and the imagination informs the activism and vision of movement leaders. Thank you to Susie Clark, Steve Beal, and Mary McKinnon for making this evening's talk possible. My name's Thomas Dichter. I teach here in the History and Literature program. I'm also affiliate of the Harvard Kennedy School's Program in Criminal Justice Policy and Management, and I serve on the bargaining committee for Harvard Academic Workers, which is our union for non-tenure track faculty and postdocs, 3,000 of us. Bargaining for our first contract right now, thank you. And I'm wrapping up 10 years of teaching here at Harvard. And if you ask me, what is the book that your students just love, right, that they cannot stop talking about, even weeks after we have discussed it in class, but it keeps coming up again and again in our discussions, that would be Bird, Uncaged, an Abolitionist's Freedom Song by Marlon Peterson. In this book, if you haven't read it, he shares his own story with vividness and honesty and humor and humility and love. And he makes that story available to help us all see the different kinds of cages that entrap so many of us living in a culture of mass incarceration. Cages of steel, cages of law, cages of stigma, cages of racism and patriarchy, and last but not least, cages of shame. Abolition, Peterson shows us, means dismantling this whole complex of confinements. His own escape from those cages, although of course an unfinished, ongoing process, provides an example of what movement into freedom can look like and what makes it possible. So if you haven't had a chance to read it, I hope you can get your hands on a copy very soon, after this event is over. Marlon Peterson, just to give a little more information, Marlon Peterson is the executive director of College and Community Fellowship, a for-purpose 501c3 organization advancing equity for women impacted by mass incarceration through education and advocacy. He was born to Trinidadian immigrants and raised in Brooklyn's Crown Heights, and in his early experiences shaped his commitment to justice reform. During a decade-long incarceration, he earned an associate's degree in criminal justice and mentored others in prison, catalyzing his work in advocacy. Marlon has founded various programs and organizations, including the Precedential Group, addressing the intersections of race, gender, and violence, as well as youth programs focused on gun violence prevention and leadership development. His book, his TED Talk, and his podcast, Decarcerated, have amplified his call for transformative justice, reaching audiences worldwide. He has shared insights about abolition and systemic change in South Africa, Trinidad, New Zealand, and the UK. Marlon holds a bachelor's in organizational behavior and change from NYU, where he was inducted into the NYU School of Professional Studies Hall of Fame. He is a member of the Aspen Global Leadership Network and a Senior Atlantic Fellow. Recognized as one of Ebony Magazine's 100 most influential Black leaders, Marlon continues to champion a world of endless possibilities for people at the margins of society. Marlon will be in conversation with Harvard's own Matthew Ichihashi Potts, who is the Pusey Minister in the Memorial Church and the Plummer Professor of Christian Morals. Matt has served on the faculty at Harvard Divinity School since 2013 and has focused his teaching on sacramental and moral theology, ministry and pastoral theology, religion and literature, and preaching. He's published books and articles on literature, theology, and forgiveness, and he is also co-host of the podcast Harry Potter and the Sacred Text. Please join me in welcoming our speakers and thanking them for being with us tonight.
All right, okay. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. How y'all feeling? Good. I'm good. I like the audience participation. All right, Harvard, I got it here. All right, I just want to start off with a piece that I rarely ever read at book talks. And I think it's somewhat apropos. Well, first let me say this. One thing on a personal note. Thomas, first thank you for that intro. I think it's the first time, obviously I know those things are about me, so it's not like the first time I'm hearing those things, but I think it's interesting. Since I wrote this book, I became a parent. And just thinking that there's a different narrative of what my kid gets to hear. So it just popped in my head this time, so thank you for that, Thomas. All right, I'll get right into it. Back upstate in my very own cell, I decorated with my favorite quotes, including, "Therefore, we do not give up, but even if the man we are outside is wasting away, certainly the man we are inside is being renewed from day to day. For though the tribulation is momentary and light, it works out for us a glory that is of more and more surpassing greatness and is everlasting, while we keep our eyes not on the things seen, but on the things unseen. For the things seen are temporary, but the things unseen are everlasting." Before I was sentenced, I had read the Bible from cover to cover twice. I kept a journal of scriptures that had a special impact on me, like that 2 Corinthians quote. Green Haven, a maximum security prison, had a group of about 10 or 11 Jehovah's Witnesses who met regularly in the religious services area. In a prison with over 2,000 people, we were a tiny bunch. No one could accuse me of joining the group for protection. The brothers there soon became my first community inside, all older than me, and some with as much as 25 years in already. They were the first group of people I allowed myself to trust in prison. Gerard, a clean-cut, bald-headed Haitian American, 1 year older than me in age and about 10 years my senior in wisdom, especially in Bible knowledge, became the first member of the group I bonded with. I developed a love for pull-ups because he was so nice on the bar. Gerard, a father of a young girl, was serving a life sentence. He understood shorthand. He kept a scrapbook of his favorite Bible quotes written in that style. Gerard became my Bible study conductor. Several days a week, we would meet in the yard to study the Bible, just like Jehovah's Witnesses did in the street. We also participated in field service in the yard. Yep, we got the latest Watch How in the Week magazine sent to us to preach to other men in the yard. We prayed together and cooked food for each other from ourselves. We man-hugged with brotherly love each time we greeted. No one felt happier about my prodigal return to the religion than Daddy. He bought me the latest Jehovah's Witness publications every visit. He told me about the talks he was giving in his congregation, and I would tell him about mine. I imagined coming home to the old congregation and giving talks in front of Daddy. He would report my progress to his friends in the congregation in Brooklyn. He was proud of me in a spiritual way, in a way that Mommy was also pleased about. She was relieved that I was staying out of trouble and was around people who were also avoiding making their sentences longer. My letters to friends like Zoop and Rel included Bible scriptures. I eventually had several Bible studies of my own that I was conducting with men in the facility. I got Bible-based books that allowed me to research the Latin and Hebrew Aramaic etymology of the verses. I fasted to Jehovah on birthdays of my immediate family members, on my birthday, and on the day of my crime, October 13th. I still played basketball, but I would sacrifice ball playing time for Bible study and preaching. I was committed to my spirituality. The more I studied, the more questions I had, and the more doubts I developed about the religion. The first time I was set for baptism, I decided to stay in my cell because the idea of committing my life to the religion amid my questions didn't feel right with me. Despite those doubts, I was baptized on my second try in July of 2004 inside a portable tub filled with warm water in front of my congregation of brothers. I chose to suppress my contention that the God of love killed innocent kids and elderly people during his wars against places like Sodom and Gomorrah. Even if there were so-called wicked people doing vile things in those places, how could we justify the killing of children by hands of a loving God? How could he? I know this might sound sacrilegious to some and frivolous to others, but that's how my mind works. I have a hard time committing wholeheartedly to anything that doesn't fully sit well with me. I went along with the baptism because I thought I'd disappoint Daddy if I didn't go through with it. That's how much I love my father. I felt disgusted for making such a serious decision against my own conscience. I spoke to Gerard about my feelings, and he, like Daddy, gave me the trust in Jehovah advice. It was around this time that I joined a men's empowerment group in the prison that was disguised as a youth assistance program discussion workshop. It was here that I met Moses. Moses, a 50-year-old man, was a devout 5%er from the Bronx. He wore glasses, would gesture using shadow boxing moves mid-conversation, and used words with the fluidity of a college professor. He was on his 18th prison jail bid. I got to know Moses through a mutual friend who I knew had interest in working with young people after I got released and returned home. At that time, I had no idea how I would work with kids or whether I'd be allowed to since I had a conviction for a violent felony. But it was an idea that I spoke about with acquaintances. Getting word of my interest, Moses invited me to attend a youth assistance program meeting. He said school groups came into the prison on occasions, and this group met to prepare for those groups. Until that point in my bid, I did not intellectually engage with anything other than Jehovah's Witnesses readings or meetings. I believed that the teachings of the world, meaning secular books and the like, served no real benefit. They could only draw me away from my relationship with Jehovah. My relationship with God is what I believe had protected me from the worst of prison, the concentrated violence. I was fearful of losing God's protection and was intentional about not doing anything that could place me in his disfavor. This, however, was a group for a youth program, and though I was having doubts about my religion, a meeting about kids was no threat to my faith. Except that when I got to the meeting room, the blackboard had men's empowerment written as the title, followed in outline form with words like black woman, family, economic development, African history, dealing with anger, showing emotions, and manhood. The room was packed with mostly black men with a handful of Latinos. Moses was the lead facilitator, and he was assisted by another brother named Brother Raheem. I think he was Nation of Islam in his day job, but he, like all the men who had both religious and gang affiliations, showed no separation in speech or gesture. Round robin style, the men debated, offered advice, educated. The only rules were no profanity, no N-word, one mic. This was no youth program preparation workshop, and I loved it. As in most cases, I was the youngest man in the room. I don't recall adding much to the conversation that first day, but I definitely wanted to come back. An older guy gave me the book, Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization by Anthony T. Browder, and that blew my mind. Guys threw around names like Bell Hooks and Audre Lorde as if it was common knowledge. It was during these discussions that I first heard anyone speak about African people before slavery. It was the first time I heard men articulate the trauma we pass on to little boys when we tell them, quote, boys don't cry, end quote. The first time I felt intellectually aroused in a way that religion could not offer, I was in awe of the way Moses facilitated those conversations. He used humor to interrupt and correct. He paid attention to everyone's words, or so he made it look. I wanted to get nice like him. A couple of months into the program, Moses was transferred to another prison, because that's what happens in the penitentiary. People get moved without reason or warning. Friends come into your life for times, reasons, and seasons, then leave abruptly. The group slowly dwindled in interest and eventually disbanded several weeks after Moses left. But that group had gotten me wide open to grow outside of my faith. In some ways, the answer to my doubts were being answered. I was learning from questions instead of answers. Just a few more paragraphs. A homie from the group lent me his copy of the autobiography of Malcolm X. That life of Malcolm, his willingness to grow, even in the public eye, attracted me. His life of evolution, more than any particular aspect of his life, was to me his essence, his legacy. I read Sister Soldier's The Coldest Winter Ever in one day. Her fiction included a love story which fed my imagination of romance and feminine contact. I satisfied my need for the tenderness of a woman's voice and feel through intoxicating romances with Jill Scott, Ashanti, and Vivian Green. I shared a passionate love with Lauryn Hill and Alicia Keys. I experienced their songs as conversations with me. I was most deaf in the You Don't Know My Name video. Jill hugged me and looked deeply into my eyes in her song, Try. Lauryn and I raised children with each other, and we had a potential spiritual connection. We had a potent spiritual connection. Ashanti smile warmed my soul when she said always on time, and Vivian Green and I had the best dates. I love to dazzle her to blushing. There was a weekend radio station that played reggae and soca music, and I had dates for every weekend. My imagination was my freedom. These were the club nights. I was in my mid-20s and wished to experience those wild 20s just like everyone else. So I would tie one of my bed sheets across my cell bar so no one could see into my cell. I placed a green knit cap over the lamp in my room to give it the ambiance of a dull-lit club. I repurposed my shampoo bottle into a beer bottle and danced the night away with my date for the night. I created the reality I needed. This is how I survived prison. I imagined fun. I imagined love.
Thank you, Marlon. Thank you for that reading. We chatted before we started, right? And Marlon told me he was just selecting this passage that had to do with religion, and I wonder if that has to do with your conversation partner. He said that he looked at some of my sermons online, and I don't know if that's good or bad. I'm really grateful for the selection that you gave us, or the reading you gave us, because so many of the things that you addressed were things I already wanted to ask you about: questions of masculinity, questions of imagination, and I did have some questions about religion for you. And so since you began with that reading, I thought maybe we could start there, the 2 Corinthians passage that you started with about looking not at what can be seen but at what cannot be seen. I want to return to that. That was one of the things I wrote down. You speak really powerfully in your book, and I hope those of you who haven't read it will read it. You speak really powerful in your book about the circumstances in your youth under which you lost your faith. And it had to do with believing that you had lost God's protection in some way. And I noticed in this reading, and I noticed reading on my own, just how you again sort of framed a particular relationship to religion as one of needing God's protection in a dangerous place. But something about that shifts in the passage you gave us. Can you speak about your sense of spirituality now, if you have one, and how it relates to the ideas of protection or thriving or well-being or whatever?
Yeah. First, thanks for having me here at Harvard at the Mahindra Institute. So I really thank all the folks that made it happen. Thank you for that. So here's the thing, right? I've actually been thinking about, in these book talks, I don't really speak about religion as it relates to the larger themes of the book. Because I think it also connects to this time that we're in. But in turn, I'll get to that in a second. Safety. I use the term in the passage of concentrated violence, right? So just give you some context. If you didn't read the book, I went to jail when I was 19 years old, initially facing a life sentence. Actually, initially facing the death penalty, then they reduced it to a life sentence, and eventually I did 12 years. But you just imagine, I just want to paint the picture. The day before I was arrested, I was at school. I was in a trade school, air conditioned refrigeration. And the next morning, the police come get me. And to be a 19-year-old kid, they came and got me at like 6 a.m, something like that. And so my whole family, arrested in front of my whole mother, father, little nephew, everybody was there. And, you're by yourself. Like, this is you now, right? And there was no somebody come save me. Just it. And then I remember, in central booking for a couple of days. And then when I finally saw my attorney, he was like, well, listen, Marlon, the district attorney in Manhattan, where I was arrested, doesn't usually go for the death penalty, but your charges are eligible for the death penalty. And I remember him saying that to me, and almost as if he didn't say it to me. Like it's a surreal moment. Like he's like saying this past me, but it was real. And then so it's the thing about stereotypes, right? Around how, we make jokes about people who are incarcerated. So all the stereotypes came in my head. Don't drop the soap. Like all the things came up, and I was this 19-year-old kid scared that anybody at this point is gonna sexually attack me, sexually assault me. I've already experienced sexual assault as a kid. So like these things come back up again. And of course, the only thing that I had to lean on was the religion that I grew up in. I mean, I was in a religion up until about 13, 14 years old. And so it was like, who am I going to talk to about this? Like, I have nobody to talk to. I don't know. I didn't even know what commissary was. Like, I didn't know like the basis of what you do in jail. Even though I was in the neighborhood and you knew people, I went back and forth to jail. Obviously, like I didn't know the details of it, right? And like, where was I? I didn't even know where I was. When you go inside of a jail, you're in it. You're in a city, and you have no idea where that city is in a sense. So, I went back to the place where I felt like I could find some sort of solace, and building a relationship with religion, through that religion, through Jehovah, through that religion, which is religion of my youth. And, as I speak about it, evolved, obviously. And I think it's important for me to speak about that period about the kids. I spoke about where, so I was someone who read the Bible it wasn't just like I'm reading it just to recite it. Like I really went and I studied it because I was studying with other people. So you had to be able to answer questions. And you've never had a conversation about religion, so you had a conversation about religion in a prison yard. Because everybody is studying whatever will be the Torah, the Quran, the Bible, the Rig Veda, whatever it is, folks are astute at it, right? So you gotta come correct. So I had to come correct too. But in reading it, that part around, you would read about these, particularly in the Old Testament, you read about these societies, for what they were societies. These societies that in the eyes of a particular group of people were doing things wrong. And I couldn't see past like, okay, maybe they, all right, okay, they're doing that thing wrong over there. But every society has children. Like every society, you can't have a society without children. And I couldn't get past but God killing kids too? Like I can't reckon with that. And it became a really big grappling for me because no matter how you may think you can justify a wrong, you can't justify a child being killed or elderly folks or people who were disabled. Like I thought about people, I think we tend to sometimes think about these scriptures as these larger than life sort of experiences. There were people who were just living in that time. So just to think about all the spectrum of people that that live in our communities and universities and societies who live in that time, they were there too. And these entire societies were blown away. And I couldn't get past that. And I tried. Like I really tried. Like, they say pray, you gotta pray harder, you gotta pray harder, you gotta study harder, you gotta study harder. Speak to the elders, do all, like I was, religion was important to me as I mentioned in the book. As I'm speaking about this, I'm sure you can connect this to what I'm speaking about right now. I just want to say that, right? But the other part of it is that, in terms of where I'm at right now, my care for young people, my care for people in general is my spirituality, right? I think that's the thing that can keep me grounded because for what it's worth, that was a check on my own personal conscience, right? And a personal relationship with the being, whoever that being, however you may identify it, is really about how that personal relationship prescribes what your accountability is, right? It's not necessarily going to the place, the synagogue, the mosque, or whatever it is. It's that personal relationship I think that really matters. And so I still believe in a personal relationship with my being. Yeah. Before I give any talk, before I do any panel, I say a silent prayer every time, right? So I still believe in it, but it's on the terms where I feel accommodates my conscience. And I think just, and that connects to the larger parts of this book. Yeah. Cause, we're gonna get into, the actual abolition and whatnot, but like, we have to, for me, this is what leads me to even the concept of abolition, right? Because is, like the term itself, should I be going? I don't know if you want to jump in, brother. Can I just keep going?
Whatever you want. They can't hear you, not me, that's right.
I always say the first time I even heard the term in a context other than like slavery context, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, those eras, was when I first went upstate and there was a flyer like this on in the jail somewhere, and it was an essay contest, a world without prisons, and I was like, what? What? Like, what do you mean, right? I'm here, but like, what does that even mean? Like, how's that even possible, right? And so the word abolition wasn't there, right? But the concept became controversial. Then I actually read certain things after that. But the connection between the religion part is you have to be, I want us to be able to not question just for the sake of questioning, but like, why do I believe what I believe? One of the things that I've gotten from religion, I've gone on to study other things, right? I'm just not obviously Christianity and the different forms of Christianity, but the one thing that I get from this leads directly to the abolition question, that I get from my relationship with religion is this deep, deep conditioning to punishment.
Yep.
It is, so we think about it, and you can think about it, just mass incarceration, right? Obviously that's a huge part of it, right? Mass incarceration, mass deportation. But this deep commitment to nothing else other than punishment, right? And it's embedded into us. It's not an indictment. It's not a judgment. It's none of that. It's just me pointing it out. It is unbelievably hard for us, writ large, to see any answer to things that doesn't revolve around punishment. And I'm gonna say why that's even more stark to me now. I made this post on Facebook a couple months ago. Sometimes I post things without context so people may not understand what I'm saying. But I said this, Trump might be the abolitionist that we didn't know that folks wanted. What the fuck are you talking about, Marlon? He's clearly abolishing systems that we thought we could not live without. And we're still finding that out in the moment. This is real time. The masses are okay. Many people are okay with the removal of systems that we thought we could not, our society couldn't function on. But the one system that we can't seem to wrap ourselves around is a system of punishment. So when folks had to defund the police and all that sort of stuff, it was like, society can't function. And I remember I would often say that nobody's talking about tomorrow, close every jail in the world, tomorrow, the end. That's not practical. It's just not, it doesn't work. You have to have systems, resources in place for that sort of thing to happen. But we should be okay with saying that's a goal. What's wrong with saying that's a goal? Because if we say that's a goal, then that means there's so many other things that we're working on to get to that goal. But somehow saying it is a thing that frightens us. And I don't think it's solely because of the system of mass incarceration that we're in. I think it's embedded into who we are as people who are in this society. It's very difficult. It makes our pores rise. It scares us, it scares us so much shitless to think that we can exist in society as functional human beings without punishment. I'll say this I'll say this thing before to jump onto your question, is that there was a time where we thought you could not raise a child without hitting them. And it wasn't child abuse. I'm not talking about anything that, it was like, to this day, I had a conversation with my mother just recently. Right? I'm like, my daughter, she's 3, and I'm like, we are like, that's not our thing. I'm like, what do you mean? You're gonna do this and you're gonna do that and she's gonna do this? I was like, Mom, y'all used to beat the hell out of me. Look what happened to me. I still went to jail, right? But, I can be a little bit sarcastic, right? But the point though is, there was definitely a time, but more so prior years than now, where we didn't think that we could raise a child. We couldn't spare the rod, right? And we've seen that there's other ways to raise pro-social children who can still make mistakes, but there's other ways to do it. And what I'm saying is that our conditioning, I believe, to like a Judeo-Christian sort of practice makes us feel not only is it wrong, but it's probably ungodly to do anything but punishment.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an inheritance of the Western religious tradition. But even in the passage you read, I think you were gesturing towards something else. There was this idea that seeking protection, feeling isolated is what led you to renew your relationship with your religion. And then you had some questions about the theology you were discovering or uncovering or exploring. But what it did do was bring you into relationship with other people.
Absolutely.
Bring you into community, bring you into loving relationship. And those were the things that actually ended up making you less alone, right?
Yeah.
Those things and imagination. I want to talk more about imagination too. But since you brought up justice, the reason I said the thing about loving relationship community is that I think you're absolutely right that especially out of the Christian tradition, there is a long-standing theological, I would call it a myth, but other Christians would call it a truth, right? That pain is redemptive. That pain is what purifies, right? And we have, lots of scholars have talked about this. We have a social system, a political system, and a carceral system, and justice system, which presumes that what justice means is reciprocal pain, right? Returning pain for pain. Now, in your book, you say a couple of things about justice. You don't say justice is pain for pain, which is the way that my tradition is often interpreted. I think there are other ways to interpret it, but the dominant interpretation is that justice means returning pain for pain. You say justice means a restoration of dignity and recognition of the harm done. And one of the things I like about that line is that you're capacious with the direction of that restoration. The restoration of dignity and recognition of the harm done. Presumably that would include everybody involved on both sides of a harm, right? And then you also say justice is what love looks like in public. So what does love look like in public?
What does love look like in public?
Yeah, it's a great line, and I want you to tell me what it looks like to describe that. Because if justice is not pain for pain, and I agree with that, if it's something else, and I agree that it's what love looks like in public, what does love look like in public?
I mean, to sort of think about it, we think about justice, I get to the love, I'll connect it. When I say justice, love is what justice looks like in public. It's an understanding that, and it's a hard understanding, that everything that human is capable of doing, for good, bad, or indifferent, I am also. And with that, what can come out of that is to seeing a person as a human. As actually this quote that, you can tell obviously this book is deeply inspired by Dr. Maya Angelou. I just listened to a quote that, whether the brute, the bigot, the batterer, is all within our capabilities. And that's an often hard thing to accept because we love, using that word, we love to believe that we are not capable of some of the things that other folks do. And of course, and the thing is, all of us don't do everything, but of course the faculties are within us. And for me, that's a connective tissue between justice, because we often see that person as an other, that he, she, they are other, they're not human. Therefore, it can justify whatever we do, vis-a-vis the gentleman who's now languishing in the El Salvadorian prison, right? We believe that even if you are a gang member, period, just that term, 2 words, gang member, you deserve to be shipped away. That's what our society is saying. That's what our government is saying. That's what many people are saying, right? And that is possible because we're not seeing the humanity in that person, but not only seeing the humanity in the person, but seeing that we can be that person, right? And so for me, love, I mean, and this goes for any type of love, romantic love, any sort of love, that it's, at its best, it's an understanding that I'm capable of being an amazingly wonderful person to you. And I know you're capable of being an amazingly wonderful person to me. And I know I can also be the opposite, and you can be the opposite, right? And just the understanding, not that we should practice on being hard to each other, but it's the understanding, because that levels a playing field, right? These times that we're in, and there's some hard stuff, right? And I don't know, somebody might criticize me on this later, but I firmly believe that when we take somebody out of the place of human, and I'm not talking about crime and criminality, I'm talking about even the administration. When we think about this person other than this, we're taking our ability to strategize against this person. Because we're thinking that they're other than, they're bigger than, they have this mind, no, they are born just the same way all of us are born, right? And we gotta be able to see that, but also see that what they, in this very time here, even what's going on here with this institution, what we're displaying to our communities right now is a total disregard for the other. And I think, power dynamics aside for a second, I think we're capable of doing that from any part of the spectrum. Power dynamics aside, I think we're capable of doing that at any part of the spectrum. And I think that's part of where our society hasn't evolved yet, right? In that just to think, the oppressed become the oppressor. That's why it happens. That's like why it happens over and over again. The oppressed becomes the oppressor, the abuser becomes the abused. The abused become the abuser. It keeps happening over and over again because of this refusal almost to believe that that person has, that group, that person has within them the same things I have within me. And it's hard to accept that when you include power dynamics, obviously. It's hard to accept that. And it just goes back to the whole punishment paradigm. The only way to deal with something that is different from me is to punish it.
Yeah, or destroy it. Yeah. So I want to carry that conversation, this idea of like love in public and the demonization of those who are unlike us towards the idea of abolition. You write in the book, I don't know if I live in a terrified nation, but I know that this nation is terrified of people who look like me, which makes me terrified of this nation. All of this fear suffocates space for love. Love for others makes you want to undo behaviors that hurt. Until that undoing occurs, abolition will remain an impractical ideal for America. So one of the things that moved me about this passage, because again, I want to approach the question of abolition, how you're thinking about it, is that there is a sense that love for others is undoing things that hurt, systems that hurt. And this is the precondition for abolition. Do you want to just talk about that?
Undoing is hard. Because undoing is where we feel comfortable. The doing is where we feel comfortable. It's how we were raised. It's, when we smile at family events. It's when we, built camaraderie in college with our friends and whatever, right? That the doing is where, for many of us, safety is.
Yeah.
But you think about abolition, just even as a concept, as an idea, not necessarily into the strategy and the policy of how it can be done. It fundamentally requires that you check yourself. It fundamentally requires it because you can't, it's very difficult to work towards solutions to very difficult things without seeing how in some way you are also, some of that is emanating from you. And these are hard things to look at. In fact, when you read the book, I was clear about when I wrote this book in that I wouldn't come out solely as like your protagonist of the book, right? I give you protagonist and antagonist all in one person. Because if I don't do that, this is not a good book. If I don't do that. Yeah, I can give you a rags to riches story. I went to jail, blah, blah, blah. Look at me now, da-da, right? But that's, to me, it's not a truthful book. Let me say that. I can write a lot of people write good books like that do things, right? But it's not a truthful book, right? It's why I look up to Brother X, Malcolm X, in a certain way, right? There is a ability to check yourself. Because the thing that I want for my neighborhoods, for people in my communities that I want, on all levels, we think about government, we think on a micro level in our neighborhoods, in our families, right? That it really, like you gotta be able to check yourself. Yeah. And checking yourself, what that looks like is being able in real time to ask a question like, what role did I play in this? What's the lesson I can learn from this, right? And this is not an exercise in perfection, obviously, right? This is not what I'm trying to encourage either, because that's also improbable, right? But what I am saying is that to do that undoing, we can't act as if the undoing only rests on the side of the other. That's just not possible. It's just impossible. It is what we do, though. It's clearly what we do. It's what we're good at. It's what makes us comfortable, because it also gives us a sense of we can feel better when somebody is below us, beneath us, or not doing things, right? I think, or I'm not like that. And to undo that means that you might get pegged down a notch. You might get looked at a little bit differently. And, a lot of our esteems aren't able to handle that. But it's kind of like what we need. I mean, I always say, the work I've done, the writing I do, I always think about how up in the highest offices, how it impacts the dude on the corner. Always think about that. How does that impact the corner? And there's nothing that's happening on the corner that's not happening up there. There's nothing that's happening that's different. The power dynamics are different, obviously. Who got access, the access points are different, but it's very much the same. In fact, I was talking to a friend today that the whole gang member thing, you could easily say that people in power are acting like a gang. Yeah. Easily, right? You just take away the titles, what do you call it?
Yeah, I think one of the things I like about that passage, everything you said, is that there's not a lot of sentimentality to the love you're describing. It's about changing behaviors, undoing harm, right? It's not a feeling, maybe a company feeling, but that's not love in public. Love in public is undoing harm. And that becomes a precondition for something like abolition.
If I could jump in, even thinking about, just bringing in the book again, right? And this is I always talk about this is probably the hardest stuff I've ever written is the dash paragraph when I speak about when I was sexually assaulted as a kid. Yeah. For years, I would not want to think about that. And when I did, I would get these jolts, physical jolts when I would think about it, right? And so I wrote about it. And when I wrote about it, it's very hard to write about it, but when I wrote about it, I did all I could to not see that person other than a person. Mm-hmm. I was I gotta figure out how do I see this how do I see my the person who victimized me as more than that? Yeah. Right? Particularly as a kid, when he did it as a child. I need to be able to do that because how can I even think I'm trying to practice this thing if I'm not doing that to and it doesn't require that I see that person or we are in community with each other or we physically see each other, but that's the undoing for me, right? Because when you think about abolition going again, just kind of, it's how do I see something other than the punishment paradigm? Yep. How do I even see it? I can get to how we do it. How do I even see it? Yep. And that shit is hard. It was hard to write that shit and not call him all type of names that I used to call him before, right? Yeah. Because I was I had to see that I wanted to see the possibilities in him, but I got to see him as a person. Yeah. Right? Because here's the thing, right? And you go to the next question is that statistically, people who, when it comes to sexual violence, people who perpetuate sexual violence oftentimes have been victims of sexual violence themselves, right? Of course that's not what they dreamed of doing, right. But I think that the line between victim and victimized is a very thin line, right? And I just wonder, as a practice, a very difficult practice, what would it look like in a world where we were able to help and support people to be able to see the perpetrator more than the perpetrator, and that's hard, right? I've spoken in this room. I'm not saying that we do, be clear, right? I'm not trying to give an excuse for anything, right? But what I'm saying is this undoing. That's why I keep saying it's hard. Yeah. But if we want to get to it, we got to figure it out because all we're doing is perpetuating the thing again and again and again. Yeah.
One of the things that's harrowing about that passage in the book, where you recount this trauma, is the literary and writerly energy you take to humanize, to see as fully human, even the person who harmed you, and to see yourself also. It is a harrowing passage, but I can see you performing exactly what you're asking your reader to do. I want to ask more about abolition, and then I want other people to ask questions. But before that, I also want to ask about imagination again before we turn to everybody else. You also say about abolition that abolition is a politics of creation. not taking something apart, but building something up, right? Wanting to end policing is wanting to create thriving communities that do not need an armed state security force that has no true judicial or legislative accountability. A world without prisons is the manifestation of solutions to socioeconomic problems. That abolition is not about it's about imagining a world that we don't have, right?
Yeah. I mean, we could all do a better job at messaging this better, but like, listen, I always say, people who are thinking about this as a concept or who ascribe to it, I don't want chaos. Like, I'm not saying that I want, what I want really is complete chaos. That's what I want. I want people doing all the harm to each other. It's clearly not what I'm saying, right? What I'm saying is that when we say we want a world without prisons, we want a world without the need for them. Right. That's what I'm trying to get to, right? The world without the need for them. So that should be like an end game. I don't see, but because we're so attuned to this punishment paradigm, we don't even like to say that.
That's right.
Like, it's not good policy to say that.
Yeah.
Like, you don't get elected into most places in this country. Most places, if you say, I want a world without the need for it. Because I think that's what we all want. You want a world where you don't need that. We used to do this exercise years ago with groups, and other people do the exercise where, you close your eyes and you think about a wonderful day in any neighborhood that you grew up in, neighborhood you live in, whatever neighborhood that may be, and you start thinking about, the imagery, who's there, what type of people there, what's happening, people playing, all kind of nice things that happen in this neighborhood. And people would say back to me, like, this is what I see, this is what I see. And it's all these nice things that they see in this neighborhood, this wonderful place. And I say, what's missing? They don't see police, right? And I'm saying that, like, listen, I'm saying to somebody who sees real harm in neighborhoods, in communities. Here, in the place I go, my family's from Trinidad, I go there, there's a lot of, and so I'm not saying to somebody who is away from this, because oftentimes people critique people who ascribe to abolition, like, you ain't been there, you don't know what it's like, you don't know what this is. And I'm like, that's not true, first of all, for most folks, because we all live in this world. But also, as somebody who has been on both sides of all harm, a lot of harm, has spent a lot of time in communities where there are everyday issues where you feel unsafe because of things that are happening. And we tend to keep the conversation in a place of solely of what we don't want, right? And I said we want a world without the need for prisons. But what do we want? And are we consciously working towards the things that we want? Because I would say, I may have wrote some book, but abolition is a concept of creation. And you just said, like, it's a concept of creation. Like, what do we want to create? I think if we put a lot of energy into that, we would start creating a lot of, people are, there are communities who are doing these things, right? Because the thing that we keep creating, though, for the most part, disproportionately, are harmful systems. Because that's the thing that we ascribe to. We're not creating a thing, we don't have a collective consciousness, I think, around solely of seeing that when we're creating the things that we're doing, programs, whatever it is, initiatives, et cetera. Like, I think it's okay if we say the goal is to end prisons or to end jails or things. Because think about it, what's perpetuating, just the converse of it. We are in real time experiencing what England did to Australia. Like, we are shipping humans to a penal colony. That is a penal colony. There's 40,000 people in that prison in Ecuador, El Salvador. Could fit about 40,000. That's the count that I got, right? That is a penal colony. That's the population of some cities, some countries, depending on where you're at. And we are shipping people there who can't come back. There's a lot of things we could call that, right? We could also call that, like, slavery. That's kind of like what happened. It's kind of like you set somebody there, you got some money back, and you never saw them again. That's kind of like what happened. But we justified in a way that says they did this thing. And I want to add this last thing. Yeah. And it's the thing about, I even think about human beings as being the full spectrum of human beings that we are today. I could safely assume that there were people in West Africa during those times who did harm to each other. And they said, because you did this thing, you're going on that boat. Right? And that was an inappropriate way of dealing with whatever was happening. Now, did they know what was going to happen on the other end? No, most of them didn't know what was going to happen on the other end. But that was a form of punishment that we perpetuate today. And the last thing I'll say, like, I visited I remember went to the Door of Return in Ghana, right? Mm-hmm. And if you ever visited and you get to see what that looks like, very difficult to see and experience. And I went there with a colleague of mine who also did time a couple years ago. And we walked into this place, and very vividly, it felt like a jail I was in. Like, I'm not doing that in hyperbole. Like, it felt the cells with some of them were the same size. Like, what you call it? You call the map of a thing, or the overview you see of a building. Somebody knows. Come on, in Harvard. The what? Blueprint. The blueprint, but also the aerial view. There you go. I was like, in Harvard, I know this word. Nah, the aerial view. It looked like just the structures of certain jails. Yeah. I'm just saying this. Is abolitionists trying not to recreate that?
Yeah, the thing that I found so powerful about that description and about the way you meditate upon the nature of abolition throughout the book is that the critique of abolition as impractical is just an excuse not to do the hard work of imagining what a world without prisons would look like.
And it's hard.
It's a reason to just say, like, oh, it wouldn't work because that's not the world we have. But the real work is imagining the other world.
I mean, just think about this. When that passage I wrote, I read, and I got to the imagination about me hanging out, at the club and all that. Like, it was, yes, that's what happened. That's my good times. But like, it was, like, that imagination matters.
Yeah. That was my next question, right? Because I actually wanted to turn back to the passage from Corinthians that you cite a couple times in the book and that you read just now, where it reads, "We look not at what can be seen, but what cannot be seen." Mm. And a lot of times Christians tend to think about that as like, oh, some hereafter in another world, right? Like, that's the thing that we can't see, that we look at, and we ignore the world around us. What you really compellingly argue is that, no, we look at what this world could be. That's the thing that we direct our attention to, which is what you were doing when you were imagining all those dates, right? And imagining being at the club, and it was the thing that gave you strength. It wasn't out there, but you looked directly at it. And what the powerful thing the book does, I think, is invite us to look at the world that way, to not have this excuse that abolition is impractical. It's asking us, demanding that we try to imagine a world where prisons would be impractical, right? Where they would not be practical. Because they depend upon this logic of violence and punishment that you described.
With systems of punishment.
Exactly.
Because we can turn into e-prisons now, right? Yeah. So just systems of punishment, writ law. And I know we go to audience, but like this isn't definitely in the Western culture, Judeo-Christian culture. It's in many cultures around, I think the Abrahamic religions. I know this is not a conversation solely about religion, but the Abrahamic religions, which pretty much all of our world, encapsulates most people on this planet, when you put them together, are very much punishment paradigms. Yep. And so it makes sense, I'm just saying, like, I ain't blaming nobody, but it makes sense that we are here.
Yeah, I think that's right. I also think this is not the talk that you're here for today. I think there's also a trajectory within those traditions that can critique the idea of punishment and pain as redemptive. But I'm not going to talk about that right now. We do have time for questions, and I know that you all have some questions. We have a microphone that we can pass around. I invite you, if you have a question, please raise your hand and wait for the microphone to arrive at you before asking it.
What does his silence mean? There we go. Right as the bell chimed.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to speak with us. I read your book in Thomas's class last spring, and it was, like you said, my favorite book of the class. One of the questions I had for you is, can you talk more about your experience with your program with Nadia while you were incarcerated and how that informs your work today?
Good segue. Good segue? So I'm gonna tell you about it. So this book right here, it's called If These Scars Could Talk, Women Transforming Wounds into Wisdom. So you can buy this online, what have you. So this book, it was created. So I'm executive director of an organization called College and Community Fellowship, as you said in the intro, and released this 3 weeks ago. Some of the members in our organization put an anthology together, and the person the engineer of it was Dr. Nadia Lopez. So she now works for me. She's a chief impact officer. So in our organization. So in terms of like the impact of that relationship and that friendship over the years, I speak about it deeply in there. And there was, people come to your life, I said it in a different context, but people come to your life for times, reasons, and seasons even, right? And as I had said, I had this idea of wanting to work with young folks at some point early in my bid, but I didn't know how to, I don't know anybody that did that, right, at that time. And it was definitely somewhat, from my vantage point, unheard of for somebody who did time, a violent felony, to be able to walk into a school and I just didn't think they would have let me into a school to do anything like that, right? She was a teacher, you read a book, she was a teacher, started a program there, all those sort of things. Think about it. And think in time, this abolition even. She thought about reaching into a prison to help her with her kids. That is an undoing. That is an undoing. No one thinks about people in prison. We may do so more so now than we did back then, but like nobody thinks about we don't think of people who are incarcerated. I'm not talking about formerly incarcerated folks. We don't tend to think of people who are currently incarcerated as assets, as something to contribute. Right? We tend to see our folks solely as deficits, needing, of course. And we know there is a need. If you have deprived of freedom, of course there's a need there. But that's not the whole breadth of the experience of folks inside. They are capable, very capable. So, just in terms of that relationship, just started thinking about still doing work now, just in a different way. She's helping women transform wombs into wisdom. See Dr. Perry, because Dr. Perry was our keynote speaker at our graduation last year. Any other questions?
I'll take the chance then to have a question. Well, I absolutely love this book. I've told you that many times. This is a moment where I think we're sort of, many people are losing a sense of imagination, right, in the face of all kinds of devastation. And I think part of that is because when we think about sort of the imagined future, we often think on these large scales, right? And so as so much is being dismantled, so much is being abolished, that feels like it's difficult for those of us who are imagining something closer to a beloved community. Can you talk about, though, examples for you of how that imagination works on an intimate level, on a local level, right? How, because I think, at least for me, that feels like, in some sense, that's where things feel more possible, is through, interactions that are on the ground.
I knew you would ask me a hard one, Imani. One of the first, a professional then a personal, one of the first jobs I had after I came home was to be what's called a violence interrupter. And so violence interrupters, folks who, quote, become credible messengers, folks who have some sort of connection to the community, who can connect with people who are currently engaged in or like known shooters in the neighborhood, people engaged in gun violence. And so there's a credibility at folks who, somebody like me who comes home may have just because of that experience. One of the main sort of spaces of credibility. And I want to be clear about this. I was scared to do that job. I think, because you're going in the neighborhoods, the projects, and you're working, your work hours start at like 10 at night. And you don't have, you got a cell phone. That's about them days, was like a BlackBerry. And that's it. But the thing that we had to do was It wasn't necessarily just stopping in the middle of gunfights and all that, but it was constantly being in the community with people and just having conversations with the folks. So you would walk around the neighborhood and you knew somebody or somebody knew somebody, and like, you know, it was happening. You know, what's going on with your baby mother? Like, you know what I'm saying? You need some parole. You know, like whatever it was that, you know, you speak with folks in a way that, you know, they felt comfortable being spoken to at that time, and you could bring them up once you build a relationship. And so if there was a instance when they were going to engage in some sort of, or thinking about engaging in something, they might want to use me as like, I ain't gonna do this because Marlon, you know what I mean? Even though they probably didn't want to anyway, but like they can say, I'm not gonna do it because they want to save their bravado and masculinity, whatever. But what that is doing is preventing a shooting. That's actually what that's doing. And I think for me, you know, it's my first like real job you could say I had that I actually got paid for. And I came home, and we were also not just telling them to stop, but we were opening them up to other things to do. We would take them out on trips and go do different things and have event neighborhood. And I would organize these multi-block parties in Brooklyn and whatnot that they can engage in with their kids. We started a youth component of it where we would get the young folks engaged who might be in high school, so they're not quite there engaging in stuff, but like just engaging them in building the community. I remember we had a project we would do every Christmas season called, it's the Strip. At the time, a high crime strip it's called Kingston Avenue in Crown Heights. And we would have our folks decorate the windows of businesses, like these little small business. They would, you know, do all the Christmas decorations, Kwanzaa decorations, and all that sort of stuff. Like we had these kids creating a community that looked like the way that they would like to have a jovial community, right? And I think for me that's one of the instances I think where we were creating a thing in a space where people were mainly, they were fearful to some extent, and fearful of the people there. And we had these guys doing some of that stuff too. And they would like, you know, I don't do that sort of stuff. And next thing you know, they got a little Christmas light. I think on a personal level, I think this undoing, so if you, I mean, it's hard, I say I'm fumbling. So I'm thinking about my father. So my father passed a year ago. You see how much, you know, I wrote about him in the book, and just so many more paragraphs about him. He passed the same day as my daughter's 3rd birthday. So this is personal stuff here. So he had a bout with dementia for several years. So he never got to read this book. He couldn't, you know, he had lost his ability to read by that time. And so I have older siblings. I'm the youngest. My mother, my mother, his wife, since they were 18, he died at 80, so they've been with each other forever. And we were on a phone call last January, myself and my 2 siblings, and we got, you know, the call from the doctor saying your father probably won't be around probably will be around for a couple of weeks. And I was actually at work. I remember when I was in between a meeting and that happened. And this part is hard because it speaks to the intimacy of relationships and sometimes expectations, but also the undoing. My siblings and mother did not handle that well. What I mean by that is that they did not help. And so, you know, I've never done that before. So it was in-home hospice. He came to my house, and, you know, I cared for him until his final breath. And what I'm getting to is that I was upset at my siblings, particularly my mother, just to be, you know, like, how could you not, you know? And I have, I want to make it sound like I just did it in like a snap of a finger. I had to think about what they were probably dealing with. They left the country. They went to Trinidad for a couple of weeks and came back after he passed. And I was upset. I felt alone. I felt, they left me.
Abandoned, yeah.
Abandoned, that was the word. I felt abandoned in that moment. And I had to figure out everything, how to do all that. Like, I've never done any of that stuff before. The point I'm getting to is, we haven't had that well, we had some of a conversation around it, but they are not the most, I'm the one that would talk my stuff. They're not, you know, I'm that person in the family that would write about stuff or express things. I had to do somewhat similar to what I did to that person in that book, was like, what is it they were dealing with? Because they definitely loved him. He was a good dude. You know, there's no doubt about that, and they do. And you know, I don't know what's going on with them, but like it was clear that there was, in that extreme moment, for you to abandon at that moment, it had to be something that very difficult that you were dealing with. And I don't know what that was, right? And that's not the point. The point is not for me to find out what that is or what that was. The point is that like I was able to create something in that moment, and what I was able to create in that moment was a dignified send-off for my father. Yeah. You know, he had a dignified send-off, and I got to pray with him before he passed. Yeah. And that's what I mean, like it's hard stuff. Yeah. And it's not always a big, the splashes. I think a lot of us, particularly, you know, a lot of friends, my dope homies, colleagues, we can get caught in the splashes of like what this is, what abolition is, and all that sort of thing. Listen, it's like everyday stuff. And undoing what you may think harm is for you. Grappling with it, let me say that also, like grappling with it. Because the converse of that is that I could have been like, and I thought it, because I'm not saying like this is a holy, I'm, you know, holier than thou. I want nothing to do with y'all. I don't have to. I don't need to have anything to do with like that was a thought. I'm trying to say that was a thought. It was an emotion that came. And I needed to take time to process what that was. And I had to see in that moment the wonder that came out of it. As I said, I got to have an amazing time with him in his last couple of weeks. And my daughter did too. At 3 years old, like he passed on her birthday. I think that is a very symbolic thing for me, where she saw him unalive that morning, right? And you know, she ran up and Papa Poppy, she doesn't know that, what that meant. But like, for me, that's a powerful understanding of transitions. But it's also kind of like, and just kind of going back into it, like it's a powerful, I think, expression of like what can come when you undo. Yeah. This is the first time I'm even thinking about it. Like it's a powerful expression when you undo, because at that time, she turned 2 at that time, she still remembers him. Yeah. She still remembers him. And I will, and you know, I believe he decided to go on her birthday. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And I will always be able to remember his passing in a joyous way, in a sense, because it's also the second birthday of my kid. Yeah. You know, abolition has to be a very personal thing. And be clear, not personal in the same frame as religion, because the other thing I don't want us to be thinking that is like abolition or nothing. Yeah. Because that's another dogmatic thing. What I'm saying is that it is potentially a conduit to expressions, to feelings we have not seen yet. Yeah. That's the point I'm getting to. And I don't know what that is. Yeah. Right? Yes, one person's clothes, all that stuff. Yeah. But I mean, I don't know how wonderful it might be. You don't know, nobody here knows, because we haven't tried it. And we haven't done the grappling with it in real time. And it's not just for to post it up on the gram or whatever it is, or even to write a book about it, right? It's like, how you practicing the possibilities. That's what this all is about. So how you practicing these possibilities? Because this is a different type of possibility that we have not struggled enough with.
Yeah. We probably have time for one more question. I just wanted to say that yeah, you speak really eloquently now and in the book about imagination. I think the example you gave of your father's passing, the idea of imagination as a resource for empathy, you felt some resentment towards your mother and siblings, but that your imaginative work, congruent with the kind you do in this book, helped you overcome that, right? Helped you come into to not put up that wall.
Accountable to it.
That's right, yeah. But the other thing I think that, this series, this talk is sponsored by the Mahindra Humanities Center. I think lots of parts of many universities are under threat, but the humanities are under threat. And I think another reason why it's important to have a conversation like this in the context of the humanities is because imagination is deeply overlaps with resistance, with reform, with imagining a different world, right? If we do not have a just world, right? So any picture of a just world we want is going to require us to imagine something else, right? And it has to be a constant work of imagining, as you say, right? It can't be a dogmatic. It has to be one which responds, which refines. And these are the tools that the humanities, the study of literature, of writing, of imagination, that they give us. And it's one of the reasons why your language about imagination, and also you clearly speak about yourself as having a vocation as a writer in this book, and you prove it with the book, right? Like that these are the things you speak about, your own work and your own advocacy. You're doing all these amazing, community organizing work and justice work, but you're also thinking about it in the context of letters, of the humanities, of imagination, of writing. That to think about those things so deeply ingrained and tied together, I think it fits with what we in the humanities and the academy are trying to do as well. And it does more than fit. I think it gives us kind of a compass, gives us a direction to think about our own work. So I'm grateful for that as well. Do we have another question? Oh boy, we got more than one question.
See?
Well, that's right.
Mary's like, I only got one.
Maybe two. Why don't we start here and then front row? Yeah, okay. Where? Right here, I think, yeah. If you ask quick and answer quick, maybe we can get all of them. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I'll try to be quick about it, I guess. So you talked a lot about how abolition, I think I joined a little late, forgive me. Abolition in itself is like, it's not an approachable idea, and still we start grappling with like the punitive aspects of our society, this practice of othering people and sending them off because we don't agree with what they did. And then also coming to grapple with the terms of maybe we could have been that person, that none of us maybe wanted to end up this way, but we did. And I wanted to ask, is there anything you've noticed in community or in prison, or even how you viewed people? Because I think you mentioned when you first got into prison, like you were, you heard about the bar dropping, the soap dropping, like those stereotypes, that helps you humanize people who have done harm, or that you've seen work in communities where people have these judgmental views of others that allow them to justify causing more harm to them, that start to undo that, even at the local level. And yeah, just kind of breaking through those stereotypes and narratives that allow us to think that a punitive approach is actually what needs to be done instead of healing and coming together.
Like some examples of where I've seen that happen?
Have you, even if it's with yourself, like, and not to get personal, forgive me, I haven't read the book, but even humanizing the abuser sounds extremely difficult. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'd speak about it in it, but like, there's a point, I mean, for like the last 4 or 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years of the time I was inside, the 10 years, I was like responsible for like working with anybody coming into the facility, like supporting them, preparing them to go home and giving them tools they need. And when I say everybody, and everybody meant everybody that did every kind of thing you could think about, right? And so what I eventually realized, what it required was a level of me also putting my biases aside. You think we all have things that we think are the worst thing that somebody can do or whatever it may be, right? And I knew that I had to, but I wanted to help this person. And I can't help this person if I can't genuinely help this person, let me say that, if I think that they don't deserve it. And that took a lot of me checking myself, right? And I'll give you one example where I think, aside from that, right? I think something really simple. I think that where you see some of these things are changing. Most places don't call people cons and all the convicts and just all them sort of things, right? We try to use more terms that are different, right? Incarcerated, formerly incarcerated person, citizen, but all these different things. I mean, depending on where you are in the country, it shifts, right? But the point is humanistic terms. And this happens in other parts of the world too, like this thing is traveling. And that's a process, but words matter, right? And words are things. That's another thing that, I was shouting out Maya Angelou, but like, words are things, right? And so things are happening. right? I'm here. I'm at Harvard. I mean, for what it's worth, I'm not the person, but I'm not trying to hold out as some mantle or something. But like, from this institution still probably won't allow a lot of people like me here. I don't know for a fact. Maybe, maybe not, right? But the point though is that like, you know, there's a wedge point. You're asking me this question. There's a care about it, right? And I think those are all things to be hopeful about, right? You got a dude that was convicted, who was once faced a death penalty, given some context around these concepts, right? I'll say this, not to move to the next question. This is a concept that I'm playing around with, and I want to write about it a little bit more, but it's something called redemptive power, right? And it is because I've visited prisons all over the place, right? And I've seen a lot of people and my own experiences. And there's I used to call it a special sauce, right? That folks, despite the levels of trauma they have experienced, and it doesn't have to, and because it's not only about incarcerated folks. If you experience deep levels of trauma, yet despite it, they still are moving on to do things and wanting to aspire to do things and have the ambitions to do things for themselves, for their communities writ large. I'm calling there's a power to that. That's the thing that our society needs. And lastly, like if we're true to like, it's kind of like the evolution of the Jim Crow, the new Jim Crow book, in that when you think about post, the Reconstruction era, but also, those times after that, Black folks are doing amazing things. And these are people who had chains on them. There was something there, right? They didn't have the formal education that everybody else had, but they were creating autonomous communities despite not having access to anything. That's powerful. And if we think about now with folks who are now incarcerated in modern day slavery, and all these folks are coming home from all these places and they're doing things, that's kind of powerful. And I'm just like, how do we harness that? Because the thing that our society writ large needs from these folks who've experienced these amazing levels of trauma, right? And in that there's so much that we can contribute, right? Think about some of the most I mentioned Doctor, I mentioned X, right? You can go South Africa, think about Mandela, like for whatever you want to say. Folks, despite that experience, are still doing amazing shit. I see Noel in the room, right? And so like, there's something there, and that redemptive power to me is something to be hopeful for too.
Right here.
And my brother here, who I just met.
We had a chance to talk a little bit just before the meeting. I'm formerly incarcerated myself. I've been out 35 years, but before that, I spent half of my life in prisons. And now I send books to prisoners. I'm affiliated with the prison book program down in Quincy. But I want to say something about perspective. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about prison abolition, I think there's 2 million people in prison in the United States, approximately 2 million people. And in relation to that, I always think of the starfish story about a guy walking along the beach, and he sees all these stranded starfish that, when the tide receded, they were stuck on the beach. And in the distance, there's a young child picking up starfish one at a time and throwing them back into the ocean. And when the guy got up to the little kid, he said, you're not really making much of a difference. There's thousands of starfish here. And when we're talking about prisons, there's millions, But if you look at it from the perspective of the starfish, because the little child answered him as he picked up another starfish and threw it in, he said it made a difference to that one. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think when I send books into prisoners. Mm. Because Malcolm X, you spoke about Malcolm X. In his autobiography, he wrote that people don't realize that a person's whole life can be changed by just one book. And we talked about your book. I intend to send that into prisoners. But I look for books like that can impact a person's life. I may not have an impact on the 2 million people that are in prison, but oftentimes we can have an impact on one person and can cause ripples that outflow from that. Brian Stevenson talks about this when he talks about the power of proximity. When you get close, you sometimes discover that you can make a difference.
Thank you, thank you. Calvin, right? Calvin. Thank you, Calvin.
Well, I think we have to one more, yeah? Well, I think there's one in the back, okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate you so much. I'm not trying to ask the let's leave on a hope note, but I genuinely want to ask you because we're talking about spiritual practice. And I don't know if you would call it this, but I know a practice of yours is steel pan.
Hey.
And so I feel like it's only right to ask, actually, in this conversation on spiritual practice, connected practice, personal practice, the practices that ground us, the practices that give us life and joy. I know will you indulge us in kind of sharing what does that look like for you with steel pan?
Okay. So first of all, so when I was inside, I used to be a part of a program that brought college students in. So I kind of like ran the program, but the college students came in and they worked with, it was a class called Two Communities Bridging the Gap, and they would work with incarcerated men over a period of time, over a period of weeks. And Erica was one of the students in that program over a long time ago, 15 years ago, 15, 16. So you see how some things are happening, right? Steel pan is there. I think I write about it in here. I mean, the reason why this book is called Freedom Song, music is super important to me. And steel pan is super important to me. It's a thing that, my father played as a young man in Trinidad. Always brag about it. Every year it's a big competition called the Panorama Competition. 100 people, Anyway, his band won the first 2 panoramas ever in Trinidad. And my siblings and Denai. I'm the only one that's played it still. I play up until last summer. I play every summer in Brooklyn, Labor Day time. Here's another, and this is probably a good way to end the conversation. I always tell the story about it. The steel pan was garbage. I always tell you that kind of thing that, during World War II, America had, posts in the Caribbean. Trinidad was one of the places that they had posts in. And when the war ended, they had a lot of materials and whatnot, oil, oil refills. When they left the country littered with oil drums. Just left them. And people in certain communities, the poorest communities, transformed what we used to call the taboo bamboo. It was once illegal. They made it illegal for people descendants of Africans to play it, but they transformed that into a steel pan, into the steel pan, where it plays a full chromatic scale. It's all over the world, what have you. That's what the TED Talk is about. But it's one of the sub themes of the TED Talk where people thought something was trash, and people made beautiful music out of it, right? And it's bringing vibrations to people all over the world. Music is simply the ability to manipulate vibrations. That's what music is, sound, right? And these folks have been able to manipulate sound from trash, or what people thought was trash. So the ability to see what is there always exists, even if we don't call it that. Right? That created a way, that created opportunities, it created jobs, it created a legacy that I still do it, years later, right? And so, thank you for bringing that up, Erica, that, the reason why this book is called Burning Cage, a freedom song is very much directly connected to the vibrations of music and the powers that it has.
Marlon Peterson, thank you. Thanks so much. Yeah, appreciate it.